Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be taking a look at Chapter 6 of the Motor City Drama by Russell Durrey, going behind the scenes of building the Big Three, talking about Ford, talking about Durant, talking about Chrysler, the Dodge brothers, Henry Leland. I'm sure I'm missing other Louis Chevrolet we touched on. Lots of automotive tech entrepreneurs, tech tycoons, if you will. And Russell goes over it in his book, Motor City Drama, Fictional History, kind of recreating the scenes of this time in the interactions of all these automotive tycoons. Today we're circling back to the Dodge brothers in Chapter 6. Let me go there. Titled The Dodge Brothers Make Trouble. How are they making trouble? Well, we are about to see in a moment, because they are still at the time working for Henry Ford. If I can go to, where did my cursor go? There it is. There we go. All right, so Russell starts off the chapter painting this picture of this meeting that took place in 1918 between the Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, and the Dodges. So, around this time, the Model T is becoming a success. It was affordable. It was the everyman's car. And I think we've talked about how Henry Ford wanted a car that the average person could afford, a car that his workers could afford. And the Model T was a success because it was priced fairly low. It used the moving assembly line to build it, which cut down on costs, so they could price it a little bit lower. And they're using the money from the Model T to fund a new plant. We're going to talk about this later, too. And really, Henry Ford had the market cornered with the Model T. There's an article, and I forgot to put a sources description or a sources slide on this episode, but I'll make sure to link it in the description if you guys want to take a look. Harvard article by a Harvard law professor, I believe. And he's talking about how the Model T really cornered the automotive market for Henry Ford. Like, it was damn near a monopoly, if not a monopoly. It was like 90% of cars in production or like cars sold were a Model T. Insane. So Henry wants to keep the success going. He wants to take the money. He wants to fund a new plant with it. But the Dodge brothers here are in a little bit of a disagreement. They want a higher dividend payout because the Dodge brothers, I think at the time, they had around 2,000 shares. I think like 10% of Ford Motor Company. They think that Henry should share more in the success. But Ford wants to use that money to fund and build out these new plants because they're too small. He's thinking about the future and the future demand. And he's thinking to himself, hey, I need to keep up with production here. But the Dodges need the money now because they've seen the writing on the wall with Ford starting to create his own parts. The Dodges are starting to get phased out, and the Dodges have an idea to create their own automobile, but they need the money to kind of do that. So Russell paints this conversation that happens between the Fords and the Dodges. So I'll read you guys a little bit of it. John Dodge, the older brother, took the lead, speaking forcefully. We're concerned about the dividends you are paying to stockholders. We know you're raking in the profits and feel we should be sharing more in the success. We want to grow our own business too and should have the money we deserve. Why should you hold out on us? This is kind of interesting. This is kind of a side note. Think about this. What is the main goal of a corporation? Think about that. Take it easy, John. Let me explain. This is Henry Ford talking. We are investing in the huge new Rouge plant we need for the future. The Highland Park plant is too small and outdated already. Once the Rouge plant is operating, we'll increase our dividends. We'll all have plenty of money, but we need the cash now to build the new plant. John retorts, hell, we need the money for our plants too, but we need it now. We know you'll make more parts in-house once the Rouge plant is finished. That will cut down on the parts we supply you now. And so we need to ramp up for new customers. You may have it all your way in your company, but we stockholders have a legal right to fair dividends, and we are damn well going to get them. So the Harvard article touches on this too. And the main goal of a corporation is to make money for its investors. And I think that's according to really U.S. laws on what a corporation is. There's a great documentary. I forget the name of it. I remember watching this back when I was in school. And how like a corporation is essentially seen as a person. Yeah, like literally corporations are given like the same rights, I think, as people. And then on top of that, what drives their profits is making money for the shareholders. So John and Horace Dodge are like, well, you got to do what corporations are supposed to do. We got to share in the profits, right? So the Dodge brothers know that Ford is making more parts in-house, like we were just outlining in that conversation. They want to share the risks of investing in Ford. Well, Ford better share the profits too. Now, Ford claims that other stockholders are willing to wait it out. It's just not about the Dodges. Again, Dodges own, I think, only about like 10% of Ford at this point, which is still, decent amount. And then what ends up happening is the court orders $19 million to be paid out to the stockholders. The Dodge brothers get a portion of that. And then 2 years later, Ford ends up buying out all the remaining stockholders, and then he buys out the shares that the Dodges have as well for $25 million. They could use that money to grow their company that they started in 1914, which I believe was called Dodge Motors or Dodge Brothers Auto Company. And this company built both automobiles and trucks. And in 1917, they got a nice boost by funding the war effort in World War I. They built recoil mechanisms for the 155 millimeter artillery pieces for France during World War I. And this was kind of a funny story that Russell outlines in his book. So John Dodge met with U.S. Secretary of War at the time, Newton Baker, and a delegation of French manufacturers to negotiate the deal. The French offered to send their skilled machinists to Detroit to teach Dodge how to build them. Secretary Baker commented that it would be a good idea. Okay. John Dodge replied in his usual salty language, "We don't need any Frenchmen to teach us anything. Just send us the damn blueprints." Baker speaks up, "Look here, Mr. Dodge, I am not used to being spoken to in that kind of language." And then John says, "Maybe the war would be a whole lot better off if you were," blustered John. Somehow they still got the contract. Send us the damn blueprints. And they ended up supplying a good amount during the war. They supplied military cars, trucks, ambulance chassis, and Dodge kind of built up this reputation for being tough and reliable from them funding this equipment for the war effort. And Russell points out how General Blackjack Pershing ordered his officers to use exclusively Dodge staff cars because of their tough and reliable, frames, the material, just the overall product was just seen as it's a tough, built for war product. And the Dodge brothers kept building, but tragedy, unfortunately, struck when they both died in the same year in 1920. Also in 1920, they were rising up. I mean, they were only second to Ford in sales at that point. John, unfortunately, dies of influenza in January 1920, and then Horace dies later that year of cirrhosis of the liver, in which their widows would go on to manage their company. So a little bit about the Dodge brothers suing Ford. Again, I found out this information from that Harvard law article, as well as a biography on the Dodges by Charles K. Hyde. On November 2nd, 1916, coincidentally, it was the day after Henry Ford's son got married, Edsel. Was it Edsel? Yeah. Only child, Edsel B. Ford, married Eleanor Lothian Clay on November 1st, 1916. The next day, Henry Ford is sued in the state circuit court. But it's not just Henry Ford, it's Ford Motor Company, Henry Ford, a couple other defendants in that suit brought about by the Dodge brothers. And they want to force the defendants, Ford Motor Company, to distribute 3/4 of that profit as dividends to the stockholders, of which the Dodge brothers are. And the Dodge brothers are going to get, decent payout from that distribution. The Dodges are doing this because they want to expand their own business. They need the capital to do it. Let's continue. But Ford doesn't want to do it. So Ford had a couple different reasons. This was late 1916, right? Ford had decided much of the cash surplus would go towards the planned expansion at Highland Park and River Rouge. Russell outlines that in that conversation, as we saw. But he's also trying to pay an increased wage for his workers. Now, he's doing this because there's an aggressive push to unionize the auto workers at this point, and Henry thought that by paying them more, he could keep the union off of their backs. They wouldn't want to join the union because, hey, Henry Ford's taking care of us. We don't need a union. And then others even say that Ford was trying to squeeze out the Dodges by not paying the dividend in a way that he was trying to make them sell their shares, or not necessarily sell their shares, because as was outlined by Charles Hyde, that's his name, Charles Hyde, the Dodges offered to sell their shares to Ford. I forget at one point, I think it was before they brought the suit. Now, Ford refused, which is kind of interesting. I think what is meant here in the Harvard law article, which is where I got these 3 bullet points from, he's trying to squeeze them out of the automobile industry, because if they don't have the capital to keep funding their auto company that they're trying to get up off the ground, then he's not going to have the competition. You see what I'm saying? Ultimately, Ford says he wants to keep his workers well paid and still provide access to a good priced car. He's doing it for the public purpose. But again, what is the goal, the main driver of a corporation? It's to make money for its investors, which would imply the dividend. Gotta pay the dividend. And this is what that Harvard law article outlines. Now, could Ford pay that dividend? I don't know. So I got this chart from that article. Ford, and they say in the article, Ford would bleed cash had it kept its 1915 dividend rate. Right? So after that, he slashed it. He wasn't going to pay the dividends. The Dodges wanted him to, but, the Dodges here would have, or not the Dodges, but if he would have kept that dividend rate, it's the dashed line there. Look at that. He would have been way low on cash And who knows what would have happened to Ford Motor Company if they didn't have that cash on hand. They couldn't expand the plants. They couldn't pay the workers. Next thing you know, they can't meet demand. And next thing you know, another automotive company rises up, like GM, which ends up overtaking Ford later on, ends up becoming the biggest corporation in the world under Alfred Sloan. But Ford almost couldn't afford it. Ford couldn't afford it. And again, Ford would be bleeding cash. This is just like another outline of this. And you can see in the little display down there at the bottom, mostly this, I don't know if you can see my cursor, mostly this box down here. The third blue box, I guess, the most bottomest one. The table displays on the second line Ford Motor Company's cash during the critical period. The Dodge brothers sued in 1916 when the prior year's dividend payout was 66% of profits. Had Ford Motor Company kept that dividend rate as a portion of profit through 1919, the year of the appellate decision, that's when the court case was decided, the company's cash would have been nearly depleted by 1917. And you can see that kind of at the bottom there. If 66% payout persisted, cash revenue would have been, it was 0.08 in 1916, but it would have been 0 in 1917. Insane. How would you keep Ford Motor Company running? Years down the line, you ain't even going to have a dividend. So it seems as if Ford was taking the necessary steps now to keep the company going in order to propel for, future payouts. Hey, if you guys want dividends later on, we need to do this stuff now in order to have dividends keep going. So let's take the pain now and reap the rewards later, so to speak. And again, Dodge's offer to sell their stock in Ford. Oops, let me go back. So Ford could have ended this right then and there. He could have had all the shares of the Dodges, and then the Dodges wouldn't have brought the suit because they don't have shares in the company anymore. So the court's decision. Ford Motor Company is ordered to pay a special dividend of around $20 million. Ford appeals, but the decision is upheld by the state Supreme Court. The Dodge brothers received 10% of that total of $20 million, so around $2 million. $2 million, right? Yeah, 2 million. And then later on in 1919, Ford buys out all remaining Ford Motor Company stock by 1919, which includes the Dodges, and he pays the Dodges $25 million for them. Again, that's 2,000 shares. And he just kind of says, screw it, I'm not going to have any shareholders. I'm going to be the only shareholder, so I don't have to go through this again. At least that's kind of in my head what he's thinking. And that's kind of the story on how the Dodges completely leave Ford. They don't have any interest in the company now, and they're completely on their own until, of course, tragically, the brothers die in 1920. And then what ends up happening later is a merger takes place. You might guess who the merger is with. We'll leave you on that cliffhanger. And until next time, guys, thank you so much for listening if you've made it this far. Check out the blog. I had a blog post last week on Billy Durant. And guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for the subscribers at the time of this video. 390. And it's really awesome to see the channel grow. I really, really appreciate it, guys. Till next time, my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.